Before I get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We will have time for a short Q&A at the end of the conversation. And so please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. So hopefully you all have that on your end of the 2D. Other than that, I'll jump in here. The bios of our host and today's guests are far too impressive for me to really cover in depth. So I'll just give a little glimpse into each of them, and then we'll dive right in. Our host, Ethan Zohn, otherwise known as Uncle Sleazy Easy to the First Descents community, is a longtime friend, a young adult cancer survivor, winner of CBS's Survivor Africa, founder of Grassroots Soccer, an altogether amazing and inspiring human. I think you'll get a sense of this and for why we asked Ethan to join us today. And then our feature guest, of course, Suleika Jaouad, AKA G.I. Jane, is also a dear friend. And as I'm sure you know, a young adult cancer survivor and author of the instant New York Times bestselling memoir, Between Two Kingdoms. I think that should sound familiar. I want to thank you both for being here. Suleika, your book is so uniquely and beautifully written, truly brilliant. I have so much to say about it, but that's not my role here today. So without further delay, I'm going to kick it to you, Ethan. Take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you everyone for showing up on this wonderful Saturday afternoon. Welcome to the FD Book Club. And Suleika, it's great to see your face again. So I hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Ethan. And thank you, Wolf. I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
And, I think it'll be fun for everyone to hear about how we met. The only problem is I don't really remember because I'm some post-chemo medication brain fog. So can you remind me how we met really?
So I first heard of you a little bit before we met. I was in the bone marrow transplant unit at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And one of the nurses one day said to me, there was someone who got his transplant right before you in the same room, who's kind of a big deal. He was a pro soccer player and he was on this show called Survivor. And I said, well, I don't watch sports and I don't own a TV, so I have no idea who he is, but he sounds cool. And a couple months later, not long after, we were on a panel together at a young adult cancer conference. And somehow we both realized that we'd had transplants right around the same time. I had, barely a quarter inch of hair, and you did as well. And we connected the dots and became pretty much instant friends. And we've gone on a lot of adventures together since then, FD being among them. And yeah, is that your memory?
I think one of the best things I learned is that we literally had the same room. We lived in the same room, we survived, a transplant in the same room. So I think that's pretty fun. And to find that out later was pretty interesting for me.
Yeah. And Ethan, has been a good friend to me for what, 8 years now since our transplants. We're coming up on our transplant anniversaries. But he's also been such a important mentor and just someone, I'm sure a lot of people joining us have met people through FD or through treatment who are the friends that you can call when you have skin anxiety or something's going on and you just know without having to explain that they're going to get it. So thank you for being that for me.
Yes, and it's been a blessing to have you in my life as well. So let's jump right in. This, if anyone hasn't read it, you need to read it right now or after this event. But the title, Between Two Kingdoms, how did you choose this title? You mentioned in the book, for those who haven't read it, I'd love for you to just share how you came up with that title.
Yeah, so it's a reference to a line by the brilliant Susan Sontag, who talked about how we all have dual citizenship in the kingdom of the sick and in the kingdom of the well. And so for me, I was 22 when I got my diagnosis. Prior to that, the idea of illness wasn't really something that I think I thought about. Like a lot of young people, I felt immortal. And even though, I'd been sick for a couple of months before I got my actual diagnosis, it didn't actually occur to me that it could be something like cancer. And so I ended up spending about the next 4 years very firmly rooted in the kingdom of the sick. And I was given, not a great prognosis. My doctors told me I had about a 35% chance of long-term survival. And so, over the years between clinical trials and the transplant and then more chemo, I think I came to accept that I was going to live in the kingdom of the sick. I sort of started a career within its confines. I made friends within it. I learned to speak fluent medicalese. And I think that, when I emerged from treatment, I had this idea that I was somehow going to fold back into the rhythms of living eagerly and organically, and that I would kind of be deposited back into the kingdom of the well, but that didn't happen. Instead, I found myself in this kind of suspended in between place where on paper I was better, but off paper I was far from being the healthy, happy 27-year-old that I'd hoped to be on the other side of all this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the origin of the title.
Yeah, I mean, I need to, like, honestly, I was a little apprehensive to read the book because, we share a lot of a similar story. I knew a lot of the players in the book, and I was probably just, I don't know if I was ready to face some of the fears or concerns, or just to go back to that time in my life, which I really haven't thought about in a really long time. So I was nervous, but it was beautiful, like Ryan said, and the way you pick the words and put them together in sentences, like, I don't know, it was beautiful. And you were able to say the things that I've always wanted to say and feel, but I just didn't have the words to say it. So I personally just want to say thank you for sharing your story, because it just made me feel just so much, it normalized what I was going through, and it was able to, like, get whatever was out of my head. It was in your pages, and now I just can, like, if you want to know what I was feeling when I was sick, go read this book, because that's exactly how I was feeling. But like, when I was going through it, I had trouble speaking to my friends about it, to my family about it, because it was just so foreign to them, and they were out being young adults, as they should. So did you have any issues speaking to your friends about this? Or what was it like sharing the story with your friends? Or did you seek out people in your life that were part of the cancer journey, so you didn't have to deal with, telling your regular friends?
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say, like, that same kind of apprehension that you had about reading it and being brought back to those memories, I had that same fear in writing this book. And in some ways, I think the process of writing it obviously helped me to kind of understand it more deeply, but it also kind of helped me to transform some of that fear. And, there's this magic in writing when you, like, put words onto the page, it externalizes certain things that you might be carrying. And I've had that same experience as a reader, where I read a book or a passage and I feel somehow seen, or I think to myself, like, whoa, I didn't know you were allowed to say that out loud or to share it publicly. And to me, like, that's always been the greatest gift as a reader. And I think it was what I really hoped to do with this book. As far as friends, I haven't met a single young adult cancer survivor who, hasn't been surprised by the way it impacts our friendships. There were the people I expected to be there who were completely absent. And I think, sometimes when people don't know what to say, they don't say anything and they stay away because of it. And then, there were, friends of mine who were very present and very supportive. But I think what surprised me about that piece of it was the sort of unexpected friendships that I made with you, with so many other patients who I got to know in the hospital and through my writing and through, organizations like FD. And those friendships for me ended up being crucial to kind of getting through that whole experience. On the wall behind me, I have paintings from different young adult cancer survivor artist friends of mine. My friend Melissa, who I write about in the book, these are her 2 paintings on the top. She made this portrait right here of me when I was sick, and this one was one of the last paintings she made in the final weeks of her life. The one below me is by Bahita Dolic, who's a fashion designer and a breast cancer survivor. And the one to my right was made by a bone marrow transplant survivor named Danielle Cordani. But those friendships were so important. And I just want to say too, that it took me a long time to find those people. That first year in treatment, I spent about 8 months of it inpatient. I would, join a young adult support group and then only be well enough to attend 1 or 2 meetings. And I think the hardest thing in that first year, beyond the side effects of the treatment, beyond the fear, beyond even the possibility of death itself, was that sense of isolation. And that was so profoundly difficult. And it felt like a really lonely experience, especially at a time in my life where I would go on social media and see, photos of my friends, my healthy friends who were, traveling and going to parties and going on dates and all the other kind of big and small milestones of early adulthood. Finding people who I could talk to about the things I couldn't with my family for fear of upsetting them or worrying them was so important. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I always remember you saying, like, it was like I hit the pause button in my life when all my other friends were just starting theirs. Like, I always remember that. I think I even used it in my speech. Sorry about that. I'll cut you in 10%. But I also find it interesting because there's a big, you do a lot of writing, you journal, but there's a big difference between writing for yourself and then writing something that you kind of know everyone else will see. And I know when New York Times contacted you early on in your diagnosis to start this blog, like, what was that like? How did you make the decision to just put it out there? And did you think through the repercussions of doing that and opening up your life to complete strangers? Although,
It's such a good question. So I want to just back up for a sec and say, before my diagnosis, I was working as a paralegal at a law firm, which was great. It paid my bills. It allowed me to be some semblance of an independent adult, even if it was mostly a kind of like aspirational act at that point. But I had these sort of dreams of becoming a journalist. I wanted to become a foreign correspondent. And after my diagnosis, I lost my job.
Looks like we're having some technical difficulty. Okay.
Oh,
just repeat that first part of the sentence.
Yeah, I said I lost my job. I had to give up my apartment. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, and I spent much of that first year in and out of the hospital and at home. And I wasn't productive. I wasn't, I was really struggling to figure out what to do as myself, what I could do within my limitations. I was, determined to set the world record for number of Grey's Anatomy episodes watched consecutively. That was how I was filling my days. And I remember
Dreamy.
Yeah. Oh God. McDreamy.
Dreamy.
Yeah. But I think, in those early months, I remember reading other memoirs by cancer survivors, or like hearing about people who had started nonprofits or who were doing these incredible things. And on some level, it was inspiring. And I think also it made me feel really crappy about myself because I felt like I should be making something useful out of this experience. And I didn't really know what that was yet. So I just want to say that, like, the writing and the column, that didn't happen for a while. And there was a long period of feeling pretty lost. But what I did start doing during that time was this 100-day creative project with my family and friends, which was just one creative act every day for 100 days. And so mine was keeping a journal. And sometimes I would write a sentence. Sometimes I would only write one word. Occasionally it was the F word. And I kind of lowered the stakes for myself and gave myself permission not to be striving, not to be trying to do anything remarkable, just to kind of be reflecting on that experience. And in the process of keeping that journal, I realized I was kind of using it as a reporter's notebook. And that while I, couldn't be a foreign correspondent, I was reporting from a different kind of conflict zone in a sense.
And, what about that process
WordPress.
For you? Oh. Hey there. I think everyone's freezing right now. Can you hear me?
Ethan, I got you. I'm just waiting on her to reload here.
Suleika. Cool. Well, while Suleika comes back into action, I am excited. If everyone hasn't been on a First Descents trip, definitely sign up. I had a pleasure to go on the same trip that Suleika went to. And then in addition to that, I was able, oh, there you are.
Hi, this hasn't happened to me yet.
I'm honored. We are all honored.
To happen at some point after the pandemic. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Ethan, we'll circle back on that point though, for sure.
Yeah.
There's some chats going on there and there are some new to the First Descents community who are eager to get out, but let's jump back into where you left off with.
Yeah, I just so what about the process of writing? It seems like in times of crisis, you turn to journaling, creative writing, that whole process. So what about that is healing for you?
I think there were so many things I was experiencing, from like the infertility that my doctors hadn't warned me about, that, I discovered via a Google search, to the guilt that I felt, the anger that I was carrying. There were so many aspects of that experience that felt impossible to express. And the only way I was able to kind of begin to make sense of them was on the page. I'm someone who, figures out what I'm feeling by writing. I don't really know what I'm thinking or feeling until I've put pen to paper. And so it really started that way. But I think the other thing too was that I was like trying to read books written, by people who'd also been in treatment. And most of them were written from the perspective of a survivor who was many years out. And that wasn't my reality, especially at that time. I was doing a clinical trial, things weren't going well. And it's a really different vantage point when you don't know how your story is going to end. And so I really wanted to try to write something from the trenches that could sort of give ink to that uncertainty, to that fear, to really not knowing what the next day or a couple of weeks is going to bring. And I wanted to write about the aspects of the experience that were difficult to talk about, sexual health, relationships, the way that kind of illness can sort of strip you down and bring you down to your most kind of primal, savage self in moments.
Wonderful. And I mean, you even transformed your 100-day challenges for yourself to the general public. You created the isolation journals during pandemic. Once again, a time of challenge, you turned it into an opportunity, crisis to a miracle. So tell everyone about the isolation journals if they haven't heard about it already.
Yeah, so the isolation journals is a project I started in April, almost exactly a year ago, as everyone went into lockdown. And it was, I'm sure a lot of people here have had similar feelings, but so much of this pandemic felt eerily familiar. The isolation, the experience of wearing a face mask, the sense of hypervigilance. And I kept thinking back on, the tools that I'd found in treatment that had helped me move through that period, and started to think about how I might share them with my community. So the Isolation Journals is a free project. We send out journaling prompts from different incredible authors and artists and community leaders. Ethan wrote a prompt. We had one of my all-time favorite prompts from 6-year-old Lou Sullivan, who's a brain cancer survivor. And so it's just a mini essay and a journaling prompt that you can use to write to, or just as like a thought prompt. And it goes out via newsletter every Sunday. So that's really how it started. And by the end of that first month, we had over 100,000 people from all around the world who were journaling in real time together. So it's been pretty.
I mean, how does that make you feel to be able, to create this little movement of, healing and consciousness and creative writing? It must feel incredible.
It's been really beautiful. And I'm not someone who gives advice or preaches from a mountaintop. Like, if I do anything, this project included, it's because it's something that I do myself. So journaling for me has been so crucial, not just to my kind of creative process, but to the way that I keep myself grounded and sane, especially in difficult moments. And so anyway, it makes me really happy to know that it's resonating with people.
Wonderful. And so in the book, you talk about the difference between surviving and living. And, we're all here at FD, their entire tagline is "Let's out living it." So can you share a little bit more about that difference for you between surviving and living, and what that means?
So by the time I finished my cancer treatment, I was about 26, 27. The relationship that I'd been in had fallen apart. And so I'd gone through a really painful breakup. I had lost one of my best friends who I'd met in treatment, my friend Melissa. And I emerged from that feeling like I should feel all kinds of ways. I felt like I should feel excited and grateful and kind of ready to start my life. And I felt like I should feel kind of done with cancer treatment, but I didn't feel done. I felt so far from that. And, I think the hero's journey is one of the oldest stories that we have, and it's one that gets projected onto cancer patients. A lot of the time, people call you brave, they call you inspiring, they call you strong. And when you emerge from treatment, there's this expectation that you're going to be better and wiser for what you've been through. But I didn't feel strong, and I certainly didn't feel inspiring or brave. I was really lost when I finished treatment. I had no idea who I was. Obviously, and I'd been pre-diagnosis. I, was grappling with the physical side effects of those years of treatment. I kept, thinking to myself, like, what kind of job can I hold when I'm still, needing to take 4-hour naps in the middle of the day? So all these questions made it difficult for me to kind of find my place among the living. And I realized that all the survival skills I'd honed in treatment that had served me well weren't necessarily helpful or appropriate in these new circumstances. So that realization that surviving and being in survival mode and learning how to live again are two very different things was something that took me the better part of a year to figure out, until I realized, before I could kind of resume living, I needed to kind of face some of the things that I'd been through. I needed to process that. I needed to give myself the time to kind of heal from that. I think when we talk about a cure, I've come to realize that's not where the work of healing ends. In some ways, it's where it begins.
Yes, I agree. And so now, like I've always, I agree with the whole hero. Like when a doctor tells you to do something or you'll die, you pretty much do it. Like this, for me, the survival part of it was just, you had to do it. You had to get through it to stay alive. But after the survival part, that's when for me, shit hit the fan. And, I was living with, fear and anxiety of relapse and meeting other friends that were getting sick and that are no longer with us. So how, and I think in your book, you said we are living on fault lines, which was very interesting to me and resonated well. So like how do you still have fear and anxiety of what happened in the past, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. In the book, I write something like to the effect of, when the ceiling caves in on you, you don't assume structural stability anymore. And that was definitely my experience. Every strange bruise, every cough, every missed call from a doctor's appointment would send me right back to that place of panic. And I think the thing that made it especially difficult was that I didn't know how to talk about it with anyone. I'd put my parents through so much already. I didn't want to worry them. My doctors, as incredible as they were focused on, treating cancer, not on its aftermath. And I also knew that I was very much one of the lucky ones. Like you said, Ethan, a lot of our friends didn't survive. And so I felt a sense of guilt. This shouldn't be hard. This is what, we all hope for on the other side of this. But I think, two things helped me start to move through that. The first was a doctor at Sloan Kettering who I actually interviewed for a story, who started to talk about PTSD and survivorship. And, I understood what PTSD was, but for whatever reason, I kind of believed that it didn't apply to me. It applied, to veterans coming back from war, to people who had survived, violent assaults. And so understanding that a lot of what I was feeling was PTSD was really helpful, giving it a name. Because once I was able to name it, then I could start to, find different resources or ways of trying to work through that. And the second thing was finding people who were dealing with their own aftermaths, whose lives had been upended, and who were also kind of trying to figure out how to live again. And so that ended up leading me on a 15,000-mile road trip. Although first I should say I had to learn how to drive.
Right.
And then I left home on the road trip. And I visited some of the people who'd made an impact on me when I was sick, or some of the strangers who'd been writing me letters in response to my column. And I visited all kinds of people. I visited a teenage girl in Florida by the name of Unique, who was also kind of emerging from treatment and trying to rejoin the greater gathering. I visited a prisoner on death row in Texas called Little GQ, who'd never been sick, but obviously was having his own kind of reckoning. I visited a high school teacher in California who lost her son and was grieving him. And I also visited my FD camp mom, Salsa, on her family's ranch in Montana, which is one of the highlights of that road trip. But those conversations and those connections, I think, really helped me first understand that I wasn't alone in those feelings, and helped me start to find ways to kind of talk about it and to explore it.
Yeah. And I think one of the best ways for me to have the experience you were just talking about was First Descents. We went to the same First Descents camp, which was fun. I think Kristen and Erica was there, and obviously Salsa, myself. And so all mentioned in the book, which is really fun to see them in the book. But you said you were, for the first time at First Descents, you were proud of your body again. And, for me, I've always been like, I'm an athlete. I kind of value my health based on my physical being. So that's always been, I'm always used to picking myself back up physically and getting back in shape physically. Mentally, that's a whole other story. But for you, I feel like, when you went on First Descents, it just changed your life in a profound way, because you started trusting your body again. And then with that comes the mental, the mental security that, you're going on the right path. So tell me a little bit about your First Descents experience. I know you're drinking whiskey, which I didn't know about at the time until I read the book, which is totally uncool. You should share the love. But anyway, go on.
So,
oh no, the height of the story. It's when she's getting drunk.
I was still doing chemo, hence my nickname G.I. Jane, because I had a buzz cut. And it was really physically challenging for me. And everyone was so great about making everything accessible. There were a couple of days on the river. We should say we went kayaking in Montana, where I wasn't, I didn't have the energy to necessarily kayak. So I would hop in the back of a 2-person kayak, but it was so amazing to, first of all, be outdoors, to be away from the hospital, and to push my body, but also in the moments when I couldn't keep up, to know that I could still participate. And the thing I love too about it is it's not like we were sitting around all day talking about our cancer. We were focused on an activity, and of course we would end up talking about those things. But it was such a kind of powerful week for me. And I did feel proud of my body. I was so sore and I was so tired by the end of it, but I couldn't believe that I'd actually done it. And that in and of itself felt like no small victory. And our camp mom's flour and salsa were incredible. I should say she was the one with the whiskey, not me.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about relationships. And because, large part of your book is about a couple of different relationships you had. For me, I feel like when you met John, and I met my wife, Lisa, we are both past the physical part of cancer and just kind of getting into the, mental part of cancer. And I think there's different criteria when choosing a partner post-cancer, when you're dealing with the mental side of things and when you're kind of going in the middle of cancer. And so I've always felt like I was completely surrounded by people that loved me, but I, never felt so alone in my life. So when I met Lisa, there was a large part of our early relationships where I was trying to push her away, similar to what I read, you doing with John. And because I was trying to protect Lisa from getting into a relationship with me, because I knew what was going on up here and I knew the long-term survival of me was uncertain. It's a question mark. Yeah. But I remember she sat me down and she was like, it's okay. My eyes are wide open. I know what I'm getting myself into. When I tried to push away, she said, cancer has taken so much from you. Don't let it take this too. And it was at that moment for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to open up. I'm going to dive right in. And I'm just going to just give myself to her and the love that we can give each other. So I'm curious to know, how did you navigate even thinking about getting into a relationship with another person at that time of your life?
Totally. Yeah, I was terrified of dating. And when I started dating John, I still had my port. I didn't know when to even bring that up or how, or if I should. And I think, I felt also super guarded for a couple of reasons. One was that I had seen how illness can take a real toll on a relationship, which was what had happened with my, boyfriend who I'd been with for the majority of my treatment. And so I didn't want that to happen again, obviously. So like you, I was really guarded. I remember in the early weeks of dating John, I would, take my medication only when he wasn't around. And I just kind of pretended, I think in part because that's what I wanted, that I was, I was feeling healthier and stronger than I actually was. I didn't want to bring the medical into our relationship. And the other thing too, I think is, I felt this need to kind of armor my heart to protect against like new loves and new losses. And I don't know that I fully understood it in those terms yet, but it made it really difficult for me to dive back into a new relationship. I also, like you knew, my chances of relapse were high. And when it came to talking about things like starting a family, I didn't, I had luckily, when I found out my chemo was going to make me infertile, ended up being able to delay my treatment so I could do the fertility preservation process. I have a couple of eggs. I call them my totsicles. And, like all of that is not first date conversation material, or maybe it is. But I just didn't know what to do with all of that. And to John's credit, we've known each other since we were 13. We met at band camp as teenagers, which is the world's most awkward place full of the world's most awkward humans. But he had known me a long time. And even if he didn't fully understand what I was going through, I think he understood that I was processing a lot. And he gave me the space that I needed to move through that, including the road trip. And, we spent probably the first 2 years of our relationship spending more time apart than together, because that's where I was at. I really needed to figure out who I was and to kind of work through my stuff before I could show up and be the kind of partner I knew I wanted to be for him.
Yeah, I mean, so by the end of the book, I fell in love with John too, just so you know. So it's a good thing. One of the other parts of the books that really struck me was, I think there was a moment where you were afraid to open an email from Max because you didn't know what was on the other side. And like, I feel like that every day, because we're in the cancer world and we're involved with great organizations and support groups, you become friends with people that are sick or have been sick, and the chance of relapse and the chance of, leaving this world is real. So like, how do you approach befriending people and that are in this world and deal with loss? Like, how do you deal with loss? Like, we both lost so many people, and I'm afraid to even become friends with people because I'm trying to protect myself, or if the worst thing could happens.
Yeah, totally. So Max Rippo, for anyone who doesn't know, was the most brilliant poet. He just had this way with words. He once told me about losing his virginity in a hospital bed as a teenager and described it as, he said, it's like having sex on a raft in a sea of antiseptic. Like, he just had this way of describing experiences where I'd write it down on a piece of paper and put it into my pocket. But he, we had this group of friends, all of whom were getting treatment at the same hospital, some of them in pediatrics. Ethan and I were in the adult bone marrow transplant unit. But at that point, we'd lost so many friends. And when Max's cancer came back, I was on my road trip, and he wrote an email basically saying that things weren't good. And I had this kind of visceral reaction of I can't go through this again. I don't want to go through this again. And I couldn't respond, and felt so ashamed of myself because, like I said earlier, I know what it feels like to be met with silence from a friend who you expect is going to show up. And I wanted to do that. And something in me just in that moment couldn't. And I ended up visiting him on my road trip, and we had that conversation, and he didn't let me off the hook easily. But he also said that he understood, and that he, he'd figured as much, but that he needed me now. And so, I have had to actively unarmor myself to not build thick skin, but to try to stay open-hearted and kind of tender. And that's the much harder thing to do. But I don't know about you, but in my experience, you know, I would far more, you know, want to have these friendships and want to allow myself to love my people deeply than to and than to not. And I really think that when we, you know, when we protect ourselves against love and against our people, then we end up kind of missing our purpose.
Yeah. I got one more question and then a couple like rapid fire questions, which okay. The last question is simple, like, you know, what do you hope people take away from your book, Between Two Kingdoms?
I mean, it's hard for me. This is why I wrote a 360-page book.
The one thing you want people to know.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the one thing,
no, it doesn't.
One of the things that, you know, took me a long time to understand, and that's been a helpful reframing, is that we often talk about health as binary. There's the kingdom of the sick and the kingdom of the well. But the truth is that I think that kind of binary thinking is flawed. Most of us at some point in our lives will live through something that lands us somewhere in the messy middle. I know that for me, depending on the day, I feel very firmly in the middle. You know, I've been cancer-free for since 2015 for almost 6 years now. But I still struggle with fatigue. I still struggle with a compromised immune system that lands me in the hospital. I still, you know, grieve my friends from treatment every day. And so I think in some ways, learning to accept that, learning to live in the messy middle, for me has felt profoundly healing, to kind of release myself from this expectation, from this sort of striving for some perfect state of like pre-diagnosis wellness, has allowed me actually to live more fully, to learn to kind of work with my limitations, and to still do the things that I want to do.
Beautiful, Suleika.
Thank you, Ethan.
All right, so let's just end with some little fun stuff. Like, you were on the road a long time, and like, you know, Max also said, I can't believe you were in the car with your own thoughts for that long. Like, I'm the same way. I wouldn't have been able to handle that myself at that time in my life. But all right, here we go. Ready?
Let's do it.
What was your go-to fast food road food?
Ooh, I drank a lot of gas station coffee. And I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, because I just want to say the reason, you know, it would have been great to go on like a long epic hike or whatever. That wasn't physically possible for me. Driving felt like a physically strenuous sport. Right. And so by the end of every day, I was so wrecked with exhaustion that peanut butter and jelly was about the only thing that I could manage to make for myself.
How about Oscar's road food, favorite road food?
Oh, Oscar's road food. Oscar is here, by the way.
Oscar's Suleika's little dog.
Yeah, he was my little co-pilot.
Therapy dog.
Oscar's favorite road food was probably stealing what scraps of my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches he could get.
Music, what song did you listen to the most?
I listened to On the Road Again by Willie Nelson. I actually have a whole road trip playlist. That maybe
I want to see that.
Lindsay is here, she can drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I'd love to do the road trips. Okay, what spot along the route spoke to you the most that you could possibly move to and live there?
It's a good question. Basically, everywhere I went, I would think to myself, like, could I live here? Could I move here? Probably. Montana, obviously. I think it's probably one of, if not the most beautiful state, definitely up there. I loved Marfa, Texas. It's a small little town with, you know, cowboys and artists, and it's in the middle of the desert, and there's one stoplight in the whole town, but I really loved it there.
All right, you get to a fork in the road. You can go left or right. Which way do you go?
I want to say something corny, like neither, and like
Right.
straight into the middle, into the woods. I guess right.
Okay, good answer. Has anyone come to you, knocking on your door to make this into a movie?
Actually, yes, this week.
What? Okay.
The most important question is who will play salsa? And I asked her this, and she said Barbara Streisand.
Nice.
So,
well, who will play you? Do you have a dream of who would play you?
No, but I'll take suggestions and names.
How about John? Who do you want to play John?
John can probably play himself.
Right,
I don't think anybody can play John.
All right. And what's the one thing that makes you feel the most alive today?
I've been doing cold water plunging with my corn pod, which makes me feel terrified and very cold and very invigorated and alive.
All right. And what can we look forward to? What's your next 100-day challenge? Do you have one? You don't have to answer this now if you don't.
Good question. I don't know. Maybe you should teach me how to play soccer. I have no idea what my next 100-day challenge is.
Well, whatever it is, sign me up. I'm on board. You are such an inspiration to so many people, and I'm just honored and blessed to have you as part of my life and be part of that journey with you. So I just want to thank you for all that you do and for the young adult cancer community and the cancer community at large. So thank you, Suleika.
Thank you, Ethan. We need to do this again, except I get to ask all the questions and we get to hear about you. Because for any of you who don't know Ethan, he's truly one of the funniest, most brilliant, most incredible humans I know.
Thank you, Suleika. And I think we have do we have time for some questions, Ryan?
We do, and I'll echo some of those sentiments. Thank you both, Ethan. Great questions. Thanks for leading the way on that. And Suleika, beautiful, just hearing from you direct here. In addition to having all the incredible words throughout your memoir, I just wanted to highlight a few of the powerful comments that I saw in the chat, and just thank everyone for such an active support throughout the conversation. But one here is: the book captured a journey that felt familiar to mine in so many ways, in the most eloquent way. It was my unspoken words. I felt seen reading this book. I mean, just so many powerful comments in here, and thank you for everyone joining in and chiming in. We do have a handful of really great questions. I'll try to do my best to get to them in the time that we have left. One here that I'll highlight from Miss Amanda: how did you get past the fear of getting sick again?
I don't know that I'm past it. I went in for like a routine blood test a couple months ago, and my counts were low, and immediately just like my heart sank. I will say, and also I just want to say I'm okay. I'm fine. But I think the day-to-day anxiety that I felt in like the early weeks or the first year has gone away. And so that, I think that is just time. It's your body proving to you that you can trust it. And, the more time passes between like a medical blip or a crisis, the more confident, I guess, I feel in my ability to, be some version of healthy. But that fear is always there, and it spikes sometimes. And I think for me, like finding different ways to deal with the anxiety is what's helped me. I do breathing meditation almost every day. I've, done different things over the years, but I guess knowing that the fear may not be able to go away, but the way that the fear, elicits, certain responses in me or stirs up anxiety, like that is the piece that I can focus on.
Wonderful. We have another question here from JJ, otherwise known as Scrambler in the First Descents community. What is your relationship to / understanding of suffering today? Your line, in quotes, suffering can make you selfish, turn you cruel, end quote, resonates so deeply from my time in treatment.
I think suffering heightens all the kind of pre-existing things. It heightens the good in us. It heightens the not so good in us. And I know that for me, like in the early months, I was like determined to be this kind of stoic cancer patient. I, put on a good attitude whenever something would happen. But over time, I lost my ability to do that. But the goalposts keep changing. It's hard to maintain that sense of strength. And I think there's a lot of pressure to be someone who suffers well, to be graceful, to be appreciative. And that's just not sustainable. And so I guess normalizing that has felt really important to me. Talking about the selfishness or the anger or whatever it might be that comes up has felt really important to me. And also talking about it with my caregivers. My mom and I talk about this all the time. And, learning, I don't know that you can always kind of control when you snap or when you lose your patience and you're just fed up, but then being able to pick that conversation back up, a couple hours later or a day later and say, I know you know this, but I'm just tired or I'm scared or I'm sad. Finding ways to just talk openly about all of it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So many good questions here. Ethan, do you want to jump in there real quick?
Yeah, no, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything Suleika is saying.
So many good questions, and unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them in the allotted time that we have, but I'll try and do my best here. So next question, now years later, how have you handled your relationships with / relating to those who were absent during your cancer treatment?
That experience that I described with my friend Max, like my inability to be there for him in the way that I knew I should, in the way that I wanted to, was really humbling for me. And I think it helped me understand that, sometimes people are just crappy friends and it's as simple as that. And, in that case, it's probably a good indication that they should no longer remain your friend. But other times, people may be dealing with things that you don't know or that you may not understand. And so I think, it's been a combination of both of those things. I think a lot more clear about who I keep in my life and why, and more intentional. I keep a much smaller friend group, and that's because I really want to have the bandwidth to show up and to deepen those friendships and cultivate them. I don't have a million acquaintances. But also I think extending some grace to those who weren't there and who, later were maybe able to explain to me why they weren't there. And forgiving those friends has been also important.
Wonderful. I'll do one last question here and then we'll be respectful of everybody's time here on Saturday and close it out. This goes to both of you. You're both so established after your experience as a fellow survivor that wants to get involved and advocate in the young adult community. Do you have any recommendations on how to start?
You want to take it first, Ethan, or do you want me to jump in?
I mean, for me, making the choice to kind of share my story was healing for me. I think, using my diagnosis to help other people's made it worthwhile to talk about my story. I feel that, focusing on the plight of other human beings like helps you heal as a human being. So it gave me a sense of purpose of why I may or may not be going through what I was going through at that time, if I could use that moment to do something good in the world. So that's, for me, was my choice on why I decided to kind of go public. And since I've gone public, and I'm sure Suleika is going to face this right now, that people talk to you and they write into you and say, thank you for this, or I saw you there, I had the same crazy itch and I went to the doctor. And helping other people get diagnosed earlier or helping them manage their cancer care has made it just such a worthwhile for me to talk about my journey. And that's why I do it. So for me, it's always been about authenticity. At first I was going out there talking and I was completely just full of it. I'd say I'm strong and I'm happy and I love life and I'm going to beat this thing. And then I go home and I'd be crying and I'd be throwing up. And there's a disconnect between what I was presenting to the real world and what was really going on at home. Mm-hmm. And once the two came together and I was able to be authentic and tell people about the good and the bad of what was going on in my life, that's when it clicked for me. And that's when I connected more with the folks that I was trying to reach. And it just made it just a much more, beautiful moment in my life to be able to go do that.
Mm. Yeah, I love that so much, Ethan. The other thing I would just add to that is that there are many ways of paying it forward. There are many ways of being an advocate that might involve, being public facing in some capacity or not. And I think the thing I always think about is like returning to the thing you already do. If you're someone who loves making care packages, as I do, then send care packages to like a newly diagnosed patient with all the things, that you would have wanted. If you love to write, then maybe writing, or writing a blog or whatever it might be your thing. If you love to bake chocolate chip cookies as Salsa does, then, her hosting me in her home with her family was truly life-changing for me. And so I think there are all kinds of things, big and small, that end up being forms of advocacy. So I guess not putting pressure on yourself to like reinvent the wheel or to like, build some giant public platform. If that's your thing, great. But if it's not, there are so many ways, I think, to support each other and to make a difference.
Well, thank you both. That's such great advice. And I couldn't agree more. It's just channeling your true self and giving back in ways that are authentic is really the only place to get started, in my opinion. So thank you for those wise words. Just a couple of quick calls to action as we sign off here. One, if you know somebody who can benefit from reading Suleika's beautifully written and inspiring story, please buy them a copy of this book. Again, let's get it out there into the world. It's so powerful. Let's make sure this is in the hands of many more, especially young adults going through this experience. Secondly, if you're in a position to do so, I encourage you to get on the Bone Marrow Registry. You can learn more about that and how to do that at bethematch.org or by way of Google. There are lots of great ways to get on that list. Personally, I am a bone marrow donor and really encourage other people to consider that opportunity. As those who've read the book understand, this is a tricky thing to find a match when you're in that situation. So the more people who get on that registry, the better luck we're going to have and being a part of people's healing. And lastly, if you know someone who can benefit from the First Descents program and community, send them our way. I see folks in the chat who've not yet had the opportunity. We got you. We're going to get you out and go to the program's website and get signed up for a program. Other than that, thank you everybody for joining. Enjoy your Saturday and please be out there supporting one another through all of this. Got nothing but love for everybody here. Ethan, Suleika, so much appreciation and gratitude for you carving out time today and got nothing but love.
Thank you all
everyone.
so much.
Thanks everyone. Get out there, start living it.
I'll live in it.
Take care. Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Allison
everyone.
Haddon.